there, Glocal Citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, in Brooklyn. You know where I am. It's summertime. We're getting the thing done here in the BK. And interestingly, my guest, we have long roots in Brooklyn. He's on another coast right now. This is a kind of near and dear and special to my heart episode because Glocal Citizens would not be without this gentleman. I got a call once when I tell you about his bio, then you'll kind of get a sense of, oh, okay, that makes sense. So he's a serial investor, was part of a group called Podco Media. And that's where many of you who've been with us since the beginning, that's where it all started. So I get a call. Yes. Are you interested in a podcast? And I was. And voila, here we are, Glocal Citizens. That was about 4 years ago. And so I have been blessed with being able to host him on this podcast today. So let me get right to his bio. He is an investor and influencer with over 25 years experience at the intersection of innovation, diversity, and technology. A frequent speaker at events around the world, his portfolio has been featured in Time Magazine, BuzzFeed, Forbes, Bloomberg, HuffPost, Thrillist, The Wall Street Journal, Institutional Investor, Inc., Entrepreneur, GMA, Travel plus Leisure plus O, and Oprah Magazine. And I'm sure that is just to name a few. He is co-founder and managing partner of Aperture Venture Capital, the U.S.'s largest fintech fund backed by multiple Fortune 500 companies. He is also co-founder of Fuel, OZ.capital, an Opportunity Zone sponsor of innovation hubs to drive inclusive development. Previously, he was co-founder of Aegis Investment Partners, a private equity boutique specializing in growth capital for corp VC-backed companies. He is an investor or board member at numerous ventures and is co-owner of the sustainable apparel brand Karina Dresses. His non-for-profit work includes the Brookings Institute as an advisor, the Columbia Venture Community, TIE, New York, where he was founding board member in 1999, and the Coral Foundation, where he was named to their prestigious Leadership New York program in 2000, and Rhizome.org, the world's first digital art space on the web. Mr. Garnet Heraman, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Florence, for having me. It's always funny to hear how many odd things I've done over the years. I'm happy to talk about any of these and grateful for the time with you. Grateful for all the years I've known you and watched your career blossom.
Thank you.
All of your investment things blossom. So I feel like I should be interviewing you maybe.
Maybe one day. But today you are on the hot seat. No, we're going to just have fun. So let's get started. So Garnet, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Okay. Like a lot of the folks on your podcast, I think I have to answer that in a couple of different or multiple ways, right? So born in Trinidad and Tobago, raised in the suburbs of New York, and then, widely travel and widely invested around the world after that. And then ethnically or heritage-wise, my family is from India. So, go figure. I'm not really sure how to answer the first piece. I guess most of my life spent on the East Coast. That's how we know each other. And specifically New York, and then since 2019, based in, of all places, Orange County, based in Laguna Beach, California.
Okay, so that's where you are local. Okay.
Craft. So my craft is more consistent than my location, right? So I somewhere in my late 20s, 30s, it occurred to me that the biggest myth ever foisted off on the American population was this myth of like working for a salary and then retiring with a pension. Complete and utter bullshit. And so I got into the entrepreneurship game almost accidentally after that insight, and have been an entrepreneur in pretty much every engagement I've had since my late 20s, including as a fund manager a couple of times over. So I would say that's my craft, is figuring out where the venture is, where the business is in something that maybe doesn't look like a business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that is a very skill intensive craft. And so how would you say that you found yourself in a position to be able to make that your life's work?
Yeah, luck. Well, let's go back, right? So you and I have had similar academic experiences, right? So I feel like even in an era that devalues the bachelor's degree, the college degree, which I think we're squarely in, and probably it's getting worse over time. I have a lot of gratitude for the kind of general education that I got, general humanities, liberal arts education, including some quant and analytical piece, right? I'm sure something similar happened for you at Stanford. So I feel like that skill intensive, language that you just used is very synonymous with being a generalist and trying to excel in many skills sets or skill verticals. And so I feel for me like it started at college. And then after that, I think the skills intensive part came the hard way, which is basically, iteratively and empirically through a succession of work experiences and, really honestly, a succession of failures. And so, the combination of some successes and a whole bunch of mistakes and failures along the way is really what brought that skill set to, fluorescence, right? Oh, that was almost a pun.
It was.
Not quite Florence, but
It's even better, fluorescence.
That must have been funny. All right, good.
No, just your look. I just remember that look and that whole gesture. So.
All right. Well, maybe you should do this as video.
Ain't nothing changed. Ain't nothing changed. I know, right?
Almost a pun. Giving myself some validation for almost a pun.
So I guess life kind of offered you the skill, and then you've transformed that into something. So let's talk about your life and your experience and your family coming from and migrating to the US and becoming this global person.
So look, heritage-wise, Indians are like from South Asia. It's a nation of small businesses. Everyone, there's a word in Hindi called wala, right? Everyone is a something wala. So if you sell tobacco, you're a tobacco wala. If you're a paper, you're a paper wala, right? It's a nation of wallas. So like heritage-wise, it's sort of bred in the bone culturally on some level. And then from my immediate family, I have a very schizophrenic family background, right? My mother's generation, dirt poor, literally agrarian, workers, and in previous generations were indentured servants who came over from South Asia. Now my dad's family is like, he's a professor at UE, Oxford educated, his family owned like insurance businesses. And, you look at those two things and you think about what they make, how they, what kind of perspective, what kind of worldview they make. I mean, I'm literally the exact middle of all of that, and I have benefited from both sides of that. So, you take that, you transfer it to the US and stir in a little bit of education and maybe elitism, it feels like I have spent my entire career like trying to replicate some of my father's family's, successes, business-wise, entrepreneurially, without losing the soul of, who my mother's family is, down to earth, pragmatic, salty, at least in language, grateful for whatever meager things they had and have. I mean, I feel like I've spent my entire career and shaped my career to kind of be almost a complete mixture of like a perfect 50-50 mixture of those two things into this cocktail of a career, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I think about it.
It absolutely makes a lot of sense. And so when I think about where I want to go with my next question and how you've migrated from New York, I know we worked together or were in the same space, the tech space, in the early 2000s. So you left there. And then we also have a connection with where you went next.
And that piece is that middle piece is really interesting, right? Because you may or may not recall why I went to Denver. 9/11 refugee, and my office was on the 26th floor of the Woolworth building, and so I saw Tower 2 go down that day and saw the burning bodies and all this kind of stuff, and then did a little bit of volunteer work that day. Got myself covered in ashes trying to help out in some minuscule way. And, it was 2 or 3 weeks later where I realized, well, what had happened, what had transpired on an emotional level, on a visceral level, right? And that was it. I was like, well, wait a second. When's the other shoe going to drop? I need to get out of here. And so that was my ignominious departure from New York. I mean, it's a shameful motive, but I was scared shitless.
I wouldn't even call it shame. I would just call it, consciousness, because you were conscious. I mean, you were conscious of what it was, and the city changed. I mean, the city continues to change.
Because remember, that was the second one, right? 10 years previously, it had happened, and it didn't go off the way the fundamentalists had hoped. And so I was like, I was just looking at the data, like, and this is inevitable. It's not going to be good the next time. The trend line is not looking good.
Sure. And many years later, many wars later, we're in a whole nother place. So I want to ask you then, we kind of know the why, the where. So that's kind of the why, the where of why you left New York. But why the where California? How did you come to be living and working and playing in Laguna Beach?
Okay, so a lot of career stuff ensued between Denver and moving back to New York, and I started investing out of my own pocket. I set up a little family office, and we had a number of successes, and yeah, I was just thinking about like how it is that I can create a lifestyle that I like to live and do these very specific rarefied things that I know how to do and that don't map well into like corporate America for like job descriptions and stuff like this. How do I get a job doing this stuff? So yeah, I just kept trying to work at creating as much of a platform as I could for and continuing to invest and continuing to advise. And at a certain point, like on the cusp of 50, maybe it was late 40s, whatever it was, I had already been seeing someone for like, some period of time. And, I think we were already cohabiting. And like we both came to the acknowledgement that we really hated New York at the same time, right? After being that person, right? When I was a kid, I would come back from my travels and like kiss the ground, like literally kiss the ground.
Sure.
And be happy to be home and all this kind of stuff in New York. And I didn't really ever see a life outside of it. And then we just got to the point where we were like, wow, okay, all these other things are amazing, and nothing's changed about them. Opportunity, intellectual pursuits, cultural richness, culinary richness, whatever, right? It's all the same. But the quality of life in New York at a certain point just struck me as really, really underwhelming. Everything's so hard. Grocery shopping is hard. Transportation is hard. Intimacy is hard, right? Intimacy on every level, community, relationship, right? All of that shit is hard in New York. And it's not a detraction of like New York people. New York people are just who they are, like any other group of people anywhere else. Good people, bad people, mediocre people, whatever, But the context, the infrastructure, everything led to what I still consider an inferior quality of life, right? 4 years later, almost 5 years later, I've been back fewer than 5 times.
And I guess that's kind of a big city phenomenon. I mean, what strikes me most is that you said intimacy is difficult. And I was just scanning my mind about the last few, days or weeks, just kind of walking around the city. And that strikes me the most because there's definitely post-pandemic a lot more mental illness that's on display.
Is that
a lot
right?
more, a lot more just street people with presence at all hours of the day. And so the question of, it's different. And so when you mention intimacy, it's a question I ask myself sometimes. It's like, well, how can I be here and just watch these people and not want to help, right? Because even in Ghana, like if I see someone struggling, I'll try to do something.
Yeah.
But I feel like I don't know. So yeah, that's a really interesting point that you make.
Well, that's worth unpacking, right? That's worth unpacking. So part of the definition of a poor quality of life is to be around. It's not that challenges or I'm just going to use suffering, it's not that suffering doesn't exist everywhere. It exists everywhere. But the frequency and the scale of it that you see in big cities, so New York is obviously, what it does is it beats you down. It erodes your emotional instincts and your instinct to act in the Confucian sense, right? Confucius always sort of posited that people are fundamentally good. If you put like a stressful, dangerous situation in front of the average person is going to do something, And so what happens, to people who live there for like 3 decades, like I did, almost 3 decades, it's you get beaten down. You get beaten down. I knew I had turned a corner. This is an emotional sort of awareness thing that I think a lot of people might empathize with. I knew I had turned a corner when, like, every time I went out of the house, I was stressed and like, and more so than feeling stressed, because everybody feels stressed on this big, dirty, potentially violent streets and a subway and whatever. That's fine. I knew something was up when going back, my sense of like, what is a sanctuary? There was only one sanctuary. There was only one sense of like peacefulness. That was at the house with the door closed and locked and the windows closed. And so when you start thinking about your house as a sanctuary, then you have to ask yourself, like, what is it protection against? And the minute I, like my meditation went down that path, I was like, that's it, time to go. you know
Yeah. So then how did you pick Laguna Beach? Like, California's a vast land. How did you land there?
I didn't, and you know this about me. I like being around powerful women, so I'm obviously present company included. You know, so you can't do that around powerful women and not take directions well. So I take directions well.
Ah, sure.
So that
Yeah.
that'll tell you who picked.
Okay.
I have anything to do with the picking.
Sure. Sure, 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 sure.
But timing aside, right? We landed in Laguna Beach 6 months before COVID hit, and I guarantee you, my life was a lot better than people living in. So putting that aside, I don't know. My wife must be a genius because she picked a good spot, kind of small townish, kind of cosmopolitanish, you know, disproportionately, well off and well educated. And I look out my window and I look at the Pacific and I look at Catalina, my dog, who we got in Manhattan, whose little bastard was rescued from a puppy mill in rural Pennsylvania. So he was happy when he came to live with us. And then when we moved him from New York to here, I know he thinks he died and went
Flips.
to heaven.
Yes.
I'm sure if he could pinch himself, he would.
Oh, that's fun. The beautiful thing about what you do is you can do it anywhere, right?
Yes. But by the way, that's a function of COVID more so than anything else, right? I mean, so intellectually, conceptually, that's always been true. You know this, right? You did a great job even long before COVID of being very cosmopolitan in your personal life and conducting business while you were gone, right? Yeah, I sort of did that, but not nearly as well as you were doing it. And then COVID hit, and then people were just like, all right, well, I'll send you the check. You know, after a video call, I'll sign on the dotted line after a video call. There's a clear line of demarcation about like investment things, right? Pre-COVID, not a lot of people were writing checks like videographic, after videographic engagement, right? You know, After COVID, totally normal.
Yeah, it's the way it was, right? Okay, so let's dive into a little bit more about this venture capitalist that you are, right? Because you are not the traditional venture capitalist as one would imagine, and you've been always focused highly on tech, and so now you've moved, and then you start your next venture. So you've had these other ones, and your newest venture is Aperture. So tell us about Aperture. How did it come? How did you get that focus? Tell us about it.
Sure. So, and it's going to be a story that might be underwhelming because it has a lot to do with my fund partner. So let's start with the easy one. These are your regular VC, correct? Right. So I spent my entire pre-Aperture career sort of hating on VCs and venture capital for a plethora of reasons. Right. So here's one reason: it's this world's stupidest business model ever. Right. You invest in 30 companies and like 2 go big and 28 fail or are mediocre. I can't think of another business where that sort of like hit ratio prevails, right? That kind of failure rate is the norm. So
That was the dot-com bust.
that was my first introduction to VC back in the day in the early 2000s, and I always thought it was like intellectually the stupidest business model I've ever heard of, on God's green earth. Not much has changed about my thoughts on that. So, and then over the years, as I met more and more venture capitalists, for different ventures that we were building, I was like, man, I mean, I'm gonna say this, but I hope your audience doesn't really. So before I became an investor this way, because I have been investing a long time that wasn't this way, I had met a lot of VCs. The vast majority of VCs I met were white. And my overwhelming feeling was basically, I've never seen such a mediocre person make so much money. And so I don't know how else to say that. I've never seen so many mediocre people failing upwards.
That's deep.
It started with my study of the entertainment industry, because I looked at these folks who were like the heads of studios, and then they'd be blowing and going for like 3 years or 5 years. Then they'd get ego and start to invest in shit like, Heaven's Gate or like whatever, and spend shitloads of money on something and then like fail, and then they'd get booted out. And then they'd wind up at some other studio, right? They run something and then over the years, you start looking at the dynastic, like the intergenerational. It's like, why did that guy or gal get this job? And you start looking at their backgrounds, and you start to see like, family, someone they slept with, whatever it was, right? And so the mediocrity and the failure of most venture capitalists was, the failure rate was the thing that stuck to me the most. So I went through. I think I'm in my twilight, right? I'm 50 plus, so I'm in the twilight of my career. If this is my last chapter, I'm thrilled, right? So I never was supposed to be doing this, because I've been hating on it for 15 years. I mean, so God has a sense of humor, and here I am. So Aperture, back to the institutional story. Aperture is the brainchild of my fund partner, William Crowder, one of the first Black VCs in the country, right? So I watched his career for years before he and I decided to work together. One of the first Black VCs. He launched the Comcast Catalyst Fund for Comcast back in 2011, I think. Then he did something similar for Morgan Stanley in their Multicultural Innovation Lab. He worked for the chairwoman. He worked for Carla Harris, and then he's an advisor to Samsung and Hearst. So you're talking about a distinguished Black man, right? Our age, he's a couple of years younger than me. And so we have a mutual connection with someone that I think you know. You know Phil McKenzie, don't you?
Nope.
No? Okay. Another Brooklynite, another podcaster, cultural anthropologist. So Phil and I have been friends for a lot of years, and Phil and William. So Phil kept telling me for almost 5, 6, 7 years, you and William need to get together. You need to get together. So we got together at the end of 2019. He showed me the Aperture Fund thesis, and I was like, wow. I've been in this business since like 2006, and this is one of the best fund theses I've seen since then. And that's how that started. So his brainchild was basically, what do folks of color and women need? Like, what have all these white boys in Silicon Valley not given us? Yes, financial capital. Obviously, that's obvious. But the real issue too beyond that is relationship capital. Right? And operating capital, all those breaks and all those connections that you use to make a small company get big faster and more profitably, right? So customers, techies, whatever the operating resources are. And so William's genius was like putting together in this vehicle a way to package financial capital and operating capital in the same investment transaction. That's the entire story of Aperture right there. I looked at that and I'm like, wow. That's really smart. So Aperture, $75 million fintech fund, definitely the largest fintech fund focused on diversity, definitely the largest fintech fund in the country, backed by multiple corporations, currently backed by Bank of America, PayPal, FIS, Truist, Progressive, Duke University, go figure. And, we have almost no personal or family office type money, except we seem to be like very popular with other venture capitalists. So we have just about the only personal money comes from Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures and from his wife.
Oh, wow.
Who is an investor in her own right. And she invested through a separate family office.
Okay.
Yeah. So go figure, right? Seed stage fund focused on fintech, obviously, in broadly speaking, preference for B2B, but maybe a little B2C mixed in. Average check is $1 million. We invest at least one more time. And then eventually the corporations who invested in the fund will start to invest directly as a company, grows up through the venture cycle, right? So that's Aperture. I mean, I feel like it's a highly unique proposition, and it's getting more unique. One of the things that we think about at Aperture is, hey, is this a Black fund? Is this a Latin fund? Is this a female fund? And the answer is no, it's not. It's a fund that basically wants to invest in specific themes, fintech, and then has a strong mandate for diversity, right? 50% of my portfolio right now is female founders, and 60 or 70% is folks of color. So, the one of the things that we think about is like what VC is going to look like when the world is not white majority. And we're well on our way to that point, right? So we think of ourselves as VC for the multicultural mainstream because mainstream is changing. The definition of mainstream is changing. The definition of mass market is changing. It's no longer synonymous with Caucasian. And so that's another Aperture insight, another unique proposition and positioning of the Aperture Fund. It turns out to be reasonably prescient in the post-affirmative action era, where white boys want to sue people for investing in black people.
Yeah,
Or
seriously.
actually, to correct myself, where white boys want to sue black investors for saying that they're explicitly going to invest in black people. I'm like, yeah. So I'm like, you can't get me. You can't get it.
Right. So you have this fund, you're investing, and then your role beyond the capital, because, back in the day, I always understood VCs and went to a lot of their, talks, and they played active roles in many cases around like really forming and shaping their investments because they had that interest in it. So are you still finding that is a role that you take or something that you facilitate?
That was a great question. It's a real point of honor for me personally, right? So I'm still super excited about like the things that real innovators, real entrepreneurs do, the creativity in particular that they express, from 0 to 5 million in revenue, right? Because that's where you really you really have to be, you really have to have your whole head and your whole heart in it. And so, yes, but I guess, since we started doing this as a fund, I've had to learn a little bit. I've had to like self-educate on how to be a little bit more hands-off, right? I'm still reasonably hands-on, but I had to learn more about how to propagate or how to nurture or how to like delegate change, right? Versus telling someone how to do it, or God forbid doing it myself, right? And so that's a big change, right? And I think William has had a lot more experience doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then also kind of developing my own style for like having more of a Socratic dialogue with founders, about, hey, how do you do this? Well, maybe this is better, as opposed to, what my real nature is, which is say, this
Do
sucks. You
this
need to
now.
fix it. And here's how you fix it.
Right. And don't talk to me until you've done it.
Correct. I think being a former entrepreneur in my pre-Aperture days, there's a little bit of a tendency to maybe be more autocratic about the whole. Here's my journey from autocratic to Socratic. There you go.
Okay, there we go. Speaking of journeys, let's talk a little bit about what you hear. So I like to ask about Glocal speak. And this is a word, a phrase, or saying that is a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you've come to value it as Glocal speak.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I can tell why you want to keep that one in the roster, in the repertoire, from podcast to podcast. So for me, it's a fairly recent discovery, right? It's like you are. I'm connoisseur of words. I like phrases. I collect them. Try to put them on the stationery and impress people when we send gifts. But I heard one fairly recently, like in the last couple of months, that really kind of crystallized. I had one of those crystallizing, like clarity moments, right?
Okay, yeah.
So technology is the new frontier of the civil rights movement. And so,
that is truth.
It really crystallizes a lot of what's happened in the last 5 years. And I can't take credit for it. So that I never stopped my personal investing. So in one of my personal investments, they have an ecosystem that includes a whole bunch of folks involved with fair housing finance, consumer protection for housing finance, all that stuff. So one of my investments is in that ecosystem, and the black female CEO of one of the leading think tanks said it. So I don't want to name her name because I don't have any I get release to be talking about her stuff, but I'm trying to credit her as best as I can. And I was just blown away. I will say that I'm going to take a little credit for like curating it, because like when it was said to me, in this group call if nobody else like responded to it, right? And I was like, damn, did you all hear that?
You'll really hear it. Yeah.
Did you hear that? Did you really hear it? That's right. And so afterwards, the consensus was, yeah, that's some shit right there.
And I mean, I would take it even technology and particularly AI.
Yeah.
Because that is and just really understanding the role that innovation is going to play in empowering communities. Yeah.
AI is the perfect storm to exemplify that, right? I mean, it was bad before, it's bad now for folks of color and for women. I mean, the machine vision part was bad because of tracking and profiling and all that kind of stuff. The financial exclusion part was bad because of FICO and all this kind of stuff. So I'm going to give a shout out to one of my portfolio companies, in my personal portfolio called Greenline. It's called Greenline because it's supposed to be the opposite of redlining, right? And the founder is a genius, obviously not me. The founder is a genius, and he had been a proponent of inclusive financing for decade and a half, and built a technology that basically proves categorically, right, that people below the cutoff for Fannie Mae type mortgages, right, for regular mortgages, there's a whole, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's something like 14 million Black, brown, and female borrowers excluded, and he's proved categorically that they're good credit risks, right? And they have the money for the down payment. So, he's using AI in a way that's very different, right? So he's using AI to combat the exclusion that comes from FICO. And then he goes at least one or two steps further, because what he's doing is saying, yeah, this person may have this score. However, if you right size the loans to this amount and right size the deposit to this amount, their likelihood of payback is like 90%. So what the fuck? That's, in a nutshell, in layman's speak, that's what he does. It's groundbreaking.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And by the way, you should talk to this guy at some point. He's something. He's the son of a Bangladeshi math professor who then like self-educated and became math prodigy on his own, and an early AI practitioner going all the way back to like 2006 or something, and has lived, because they were immigrants, lived in depressed neighborhoods, right, when he was growing up, and is basketball aficionado. Wanted to play basketball professionally, and then never,
that's a long shot, so it's okay. He studied hard.
As a mathematician, did the did the statistics on that happening, right. And then he decided he better have a fallback.
Right.
But he's been at the forefront of AI and like inclusion for decade and a half, right? And he's building this thing that I think, with a little luck, going to be a juggernaut.
Yeah. I mean, and that is the momentum that we're moving towards. And so that kind of brings me to fuel, because that seems like another huge game changer. And particularly because it has the opportunity zones piece and the real estate piece. Real estate's always something that I'm always keen to look at. So tell us about fuel.
Yeah, so fuel was, I had a hand in co-founding it, and then I, in the spirit of honesty and transparency, then had to like pull back from because of Aperture, because fuel was predated Aperture by only about a year or so. And so in that year and a half, these investment partners that I have went first to Kansas City, then to Atlanta. And then basically we're making the case with local universities, local politicians, that whatever development was happening in the OZ in their respective cities was never going to be as successful as far as inclusive development and wealth transfer to folks of color and to women, unless there was like an innovation hub part of the real estate development. And so it's not just about fixing this building, it's about fixing this startup ecosystem, or building the startup ecosystem to go with the real estate development, with the gentrification.
Yep.
So if any of this sounds familiar, it should, because it was basically your day job, at I don't remember if you were at iTech. You were not at iTech. You EDC. And so why people wanted to hear what I had to say was that I was just copying what Florence told me like 10, 15 years ago, right? So I have to you have to take a bow for, all I did was curate it, right? And sort of marry it to that other part of my life, which was But this is something New York was doing, you know, I mean, shockingly, right? Early in the game, post 9/11, right? Systematically, right? Downtown,
Pre 9/11, pre
pre
9/11.
9/11. That's right. That's right. Because we did, you did Dumbo, right? Didn't you? Dumbo was pre 9/11.
Dumbo, Long Island City, Industry City, all of that was.
You would laugh, but I use all that stuff. I use all of those examples. Dumbo is the one that was closest to me, right? Because I lived on the edge of it, right? But so I use all those examples, when we were putting together our materials and then talking to different. So all those things got to a certain level of fruition, and then, I had to leave. I had to start focusing in on Aperture. So, to some extent, Fuel is still an ongoing endeavor with, the partners that are there, but I'm not super active in it. And, they haven't finished like a full project yet in either city. They're still in discussions. And so that's, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of the nature of the beast in that kind of space, right? When you have to deal with public-private partnerships to kind of get things working.
It's tough. There was in the middle, we were awarded a major contract in Kansas City, and then the mayor who signed it, and the city attorney who signed it both left office, and then the new mayor came in and
Yeah,
just
there it is.
first ignored it and then rejected it and then started the whole process over again.
Yeah.
We won the RFP and all this kind of stuff, and then he reset the clock, and right around that time, Aperture was starting its fundraising, and I had to be present for that. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and it's kind of heartbreaking because it's not just a US thing, it's a global thing. It's happened to me time and time over. And so I want to ask you about mindset. What is your favorite or most interesting mindset hack? One that you practice, one that you imagine, one that you know of?
It's all around my meditation practice. You and I talked about it. I don't remember the exact years that you and I were spending time together and stuff, but I had my meditation practice now for the last 20 years almost. I think started in my late 30s, early 40s, mid 30s. I don't know. It started in Denver, by the way.
Ah, right. Yes. I remember that because you had the whole space. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And it was part of the healing process for post 9/11, whatever. I mean, I hesitate to call it PTSD because there are, the wounded warriors and, soldiers and all this kind of stuff out there who have a much bigger claim on that language. But, it was.
Yeah. I mean, it's trauma.
Definitely trauma. And so I got to a certain level of therapy after a year and a half, 2 years. And my therapist said, "Hey, well, how do you feel?" I was like, "Terrible." He goes, "Well, but you've kind of run the course of the therapy. So usually if this happens, what we do is we think about this as a juncture, as a fork in the road. Down one path is medication." And down the other path, she was saying essentially that they had seen a lot of, good results with meditation. And I'm like, "What's that?" And so I am very fearful of all Western medicine and pills in particular. So I don't even take aspirin. And I've always been like that because I think, I was a pretty sickly kid growing up. So I had a shitload of medicine stuff down my gullet when I was growing up. And as an adult, just stopped taking them altogether, So I chose meditation, and that was, like Robert Frost says, that made all the difference.
Yeah. So that is it. That is a mindset hack.
So that is a huge mindset. And so it's a multivalent mindset. On one valence, it's practice, and it's sort of discipline, consistency, workflow, life flow, reorganization, right? Because you have to make sure that there's room for it. On the practice level, I would also be thinking about things like the types of meditation that you can do. Like people don't realize that you can and should be meditating while you're in movement, not just meditation. Moving meditation is especially for folks like us, runners, right? I mean, I started meditating a lot when I was running, in my 40s and stuff like this. And it's a really very useful thing to do. It really helped a lot with my time, actually, So before COVID, I got my mile time down to 6:30, 6:27. For an old man, I was feeling pretty good.
It's not bad.
I was feeling pretty good. Okay, so and then the other valences that I think it operates on are things that are talked about a lot. So for me, there's almost a dialectic relationship between these two things. One is gratitude, obviously, right? Huge. And then the other is acceptance, right? And so if you can get straight with those two things and how they work in your life and in your heart, you're going to go far no matter what happens. And so gratitude is what it is. Acceptance is just, I think it's hard for people to really understand what that means, right? So, do a mini disquisition on acceptance right now. But what acceptance is really just, I mean, it operates when you're sad, right? You have to accept that you're sad, right? I mean, and gratitude helps drag you away from that by basically reminding you of all the reasons you have not to be sad. And so acceptance is not resignation, or it's not giving up and stuff like this, right? Acceptance is basically letting these things letting them come into your life, or wash over you, and knowing, having enough sort of self-awareness and understanding to know that what you feel in that moment, or what you're experiencing in that moment, is not all you are or will be. Once you get that dialectic, you're going to cut through life like an icebreaker.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that. And even just breaking it down, because a lot of my guests say their hack is meditation, but that you have given us what did you call it?
A disquisition.
Disquisition.
Well, that's a Stanford word right there, man. And
I know.
I'm not talking about that cheesy president that just got the boot either. That's a Stanford word right there.
That's a Hennessy.
That's not even a Columbia word.
Oh my gosh. Right. Okay. So I want to turn the table just slightly, because I love talking about the business side, but we want to know a little bit more about the Garnet that's not investing and not doing, because you have this other self. I'm just looking at your bookcase, and I know that there's just all this other you. So tell us more about who Garnet is when he's not working. And I'd like to ask a question. Are you a reader, a watcher, or you're a listener? And what are some of your reads, watches, or listens, your favorite reads, watches, or listens?
You know how when we used to go to dinner parties and stuff in New York, you would, not you, one would look at people's books.
Yes.
And yeah. It's trite, right? But it's like,
I mean, it tells you something a lot, actually.
But you can learn a lot about people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so, okay. So in the spirit of salacious sharing, here's something, right? So
Sure.
and this is a relatively new practice or like facet. So and I tell it to people when I want to get a kick out of when I get a rise out of them, or whatever the phrase is. Right? So I think about death every day, and I usually just wait for like the pregnant pause to get to give birth, right? and so what I mean by that is, as I've gotten a little bit older, a little bit more settled, and all this kind of thing, a little bit more comfortable with the things that I used to always think like made me too different to be around people. I don't know what, but I realize that it's less about death, really, right? I say it like sometimes in the same breath that I talk about, like, hey, my mom passed in 2020. My father-in-law passed 8 days later. Then my wife's stepfather passed. It was a tough year, 2020, right? So I usually say it in that context that people get all like serious. No, but it means mostly I think about what a good life is, like every day, right? I mean, and if you don't have that thought every day and do something about it every day, you're probably not living your best life. I'm almost certain I'm living my best life because I do that.
So could you say you just contemplate your mortality, or specifically death in general?
No, like what it is you want people to remember. It's not about mortality. Who gives a shit? That's a foregone conclusion, right? I mean, so there's a great book, right? The remains of the day. What's left? What's left after you slough off the mortal coil? What's left? That's what you should be thinking about every day. So it is sort of thinking about death, right? But it's really not. It's about what's left. What remains? What persists? Right? I have low hopes for myself, but I'm trying to play catch up. With regard to doing right by as many people as possible, and doing right by the world, and maybe not being so bitter against the shit that I don't like, and the people I don't like. you know what I'm saying? I'm like,
I do.
so yeah, I think mindset wise, yeah, think about death because it'll lead you organically to think about life.
And I know that you have to get moving, so I won't keep you too much longer, but I think that's a great final thought. But do you want to leave us with any other last thoughts?
I don't know that I have anymore. I think I may have shot my wad.
It was received, though. It was well received.
I gave you 2 or 3 good quotes.
You did. You did. You gave us some good stuff. So,
Yeah, my exhortation is to be open-hearted and open-minded. That's it. Everything else will fall into place.
and that's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Garnet.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the podcast. You can catch us each and every Tuesday with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, tell a friend, particularly if you listen on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon. It really helps other people find great content on the internet. So until next time, bye for now.